The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have Senator Adam Ebbin representing the 30th District from Northern Virginia. Welcome,
Thanks
sir.
for having me.
So tell me, how are things going on in your district? We've been under a recession for, 6 or 7 years now. We've been under sequestration, a lot of cuts from the federal government. Have they had adverse economic impacts in your district?
It has, though unemployment in Northern Virginia is the lowest that it's been in some time, and the state unemployment rate is at a low. We have had issues because of sequestration. Since the military moved out of Crystal City, civilian military, the office vacancy rate in Crystal City is really significant, and it's not. We need to improve it throughout the district.
Describe your district for us. I know it's very diverse.
Well, it's the best district in the Commonwealth, I think. It goes from National Airport on the river down to Crystal City, to Old Town Alexandria, to the Mount Vernon Estate, and then down to Fort Belvoir. And there's about 200,000 people west of there, up to Columbia Pike in Arlington, and up to Quaker Lane in Alexandria, and all the way into Lee District in Fairfax.
So I take it you have a lot of people who work for the federal government in your district.
We do. It's probably the largest, if not, it's probably the largest employer.
And talk to us a little bit about this new initiative called Go Virginia.
Sure. This is something that the governor worked out in a bipartisan way with business leaders as well as legislators, that will be regional people working together regionally for business rather than just in their individual silos of cities and counties. And this will be using state incentives to bring businesses to our areas, but to use things, money provided by the state for things like infrastructure, so that if there's a business in one area but we need a connection from a highway in another to go through, that we can make that happen. We want to use state tax revenues to return to those regions that share economic development costs. So that's an incentive for folks.
And I understand that this is driven from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. There will be local councils who will make recommendations to a region, and ultimately a decision will be made at the state level.
That's right, and that's why it's so important that we get business leaders partnering with local government, with state government, to work on the same page. We don't always have that right now. So this is an exciting initiative. And Governor McAuliffe has been the leader in Virginia, bringing jobs to our Commonwealth in a record way. I know of two companies, for example, that he brought to Crystal City. One called Lindell Corporation, which is a large European grocery chain. Their headquarters will be in Crystal City, with outlets in other parts of the Commonwealth. And then recently he brought a new technology company that provides a way of shopping for cars.
Now, tell us about your service on the Agricultural Committee. You represent primarily an urban area, so that must be an interesting contrast for you.
Well, you certainly learn a lot, but it's agriculture, conservation, and natural resources. So in terms of conservation and natural resources, it's a great fit for the Potomac River and for our environment in general, because Northern Virginia is considered a non-attainment area based on federal air quality standards. So it's important for me to learn about that, but I wasn't expecting to learn about so many animal bills. I've learned all kinds of things about black vultures and chimpanzees and lots of animals.
But I understand that agriculture is the largest employer in the state of Virginia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a huge economic driver for us, and it's important that we all be aware of it. I've learned a lot about not just agriculture, but about oysters and different crops that we've got. So I'm happy to know more and to see if we can't benefit other areas of the state as well, which contributes to our economy.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on here in the General Assembly. How many bills have been introduced? What kind of budget are we looking at? And how much longer will we be here?
Sure. Well, we've got 2,700 bills to deal with in 60 days. And then we have a $100 billion budget that will cover the next 2 years to pass. And this is the long session, 60 days to deal with those 2,700 bills, but it's pretty hectic nonetheless. I think, I don't know when this will air, but we're at the halfway mark now, almost at the halfway mark.
Now this is the governor's first and only budget he gets to present, correct?
Yeah, and that's an odd situation for Virginia. And I have voted for, and the Senate has passed more than once, legislation that the budget the governor presents will be the budget he lives with. When we started, when Governor McAuliffe started, he accepted or has to live with the 2-year budget that Governor McDonald presented. So this budget that he's presenting halfway into his term will cover half of his term, and then on his way out, he'll be proposing a budget for the next governor. So we passed legislation that the governor would propose the budgets that his administration would live with. And we're hoping that the House will agree this time.
Now, how many bills have you been able to get through the Senate so far?
Well, I've gotten 10 bills thus far, and I got another one that's yet to be considered. And then I also have had some bills that were referred to study commissions, which is not always a bad thing, because then you can build up support when you introduce it again. For example, I've been working on an asbestos worker safety bill for about 4 years. Last year it was referred to the Housing Commission. They made a recommendation, and it sailed through the bill. Through the Senate, at least.
So patience is really a virtue here. It takes a while.
Yeah, especially on the big issues, you have to have persistence. That's right.
Now you have a bill dealing with driver's licenses, first-time marijuana offenders.
Sure, I've tried to reform our marijuana laws in a more comprehensive way, but the thing that really I'm proud of thus far, we got it through the Senate in a really bipartisan way, says that if you're a first-time offender, you wouldn't lose your driver's license for 6 months. Currently, you do have to do that under federal law. You can get an exemption. But we have something in Virginia called a deferred disposition, which means for your first drug offense, you do community service, you pay a fine, you submit to drug testing randomly, and you lose your driver's license for 6 months. And you're also supposed to maintain and keep a job. And it's hard to, keep or seek a job. And it's hard to keep a job or seek a new job while you don't have a driver's license. So this makes common sense, and it was a provision in all 50 states, but every state surrounding Virginia, every one of them, along with about 35 other states, no longer do this.
Now what about alcohol licenses in restaurants?
Oh, yes. Well, there are some antiquated rules dealing with the ABC licenses in Virginia. We don't have bars in Virginia. We only have restaurants that serve alcohol. And in order to serve spirits, you have to have a percentage of your receipts from food, which I think is fine. But you have to serve what the code calls substantial meals with 2 side dishes, a protein and 2 side dishes served at one of the 3 customary times of day.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and if you want to have oysters in the Eastern Shore, or a chicken Caesar salad in Richmond, or a pizza with salad in Northern Virginia, those things are not considered substantial meals. And I want to change that. I think food is food. And it sure makes less bureaucracy for our small business people when they're running a restaurant if they just know that food is all that matters. I don't think when you get a restaurant license or a beverage license that you should be writing your menu with a lawyer, but rather with the chef.
Now you've been a leader in non-discrimination. There's some legislation that was pending here regarding transgender use of bathroom facilities. Talk to us about that.
Sure. I mean, there are some bills that are based on ignorance and mean-spiritedness, and I don't know if this is ignorant or mean-spirited or both. But right now, if someone has gone through a gender identity change and they look pretty different, and they are pretty different, we wouldn't want someone who was a woman who now has a beard to be used in a ladies' room. And we want people to feel comfortable. And if you can't detect the difference in their gender from when they were born, who cares? I mean, it's really the uninformed people who are pushing this forward. But I was really proud that the House of Delegates defeated that bill in committee the other day.
As a matter of fact, there's litigation pending on that issue, is there not?
There is in the U.S. In the federal courts, and I'm hopeful that there'll be a good result. There's a tradition in Virginia that we don't generally deal with things that would affect pending litigation, and this is one of those cases.
Now, what about marriage licenses, the controversy around marriage licenses that erupted after the Supreme Court decision and the clerk's inaction in the state of Kentucky?
Sure. Well, in Virginia and everywhere in the country, you need to follow the law of the land, particularly when you take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And most people know about Kim Davis, the clerk in Kentucky who refused to do so. In Virginia, Senator Carrico had introduced a few bills dealing with that. And there was one that came through my committee that says that if you officiate at a wedding, that you don't have to officiate at gay weddings, basically. And it allowed originally for other kinds of discrimination as well. That'll be coming to the floor in just a few days, and I'll be working against it.
Now, what about just discrimination in general in public employment?
Sure. Well, we've had some good results this year. I've introduced public employment non-discrimination bills for the last 8 years, and it's passed the Senate probably 5 or 6 times. Now, this year, what I was particularly proud of is that we had 6 Republican votes. This is becoming a bipartisan issue. And if you look at the Republicans who supported the bill, they're largely the younger Republicans, which is as the population is changing in general. Young people don't see discrimination as something they want to be a part of, and they don't also understand what's the big deal. So I'm happy to see the General Assembly, at least the Senate, starting to follow the population.
In terms of the environment, what kind of recycling efforts are you pursuing?
Oh, yes. Well, in Virginia, there's not a requirement that multifamily houses like condos or apartments have recycling, which came to my attention. I was really surprised. I'd lived in condos where there was, and I started a program at the Auburn Village condos in Alexandria at Commonwealth and Glebe. And what I've done is suggested or required that the Housing Commission will study that, and then hopefully they'll come up with a recommendation that we can turn into law next year.
How is our election process doing here in the state? Is there a need for training?
Yes, I'm really privileged to now be on the Privileges and Elections Committee, which deals with elections, and I've been trying to get on that for about 12 years. I mean, the right to vote is one of the most fundamental things we have to be an American and a Virginian, and I'm happy to vote to make it easier to vote. Now, with Senator McEachin, I've worked to see that our election officials will have the ability to have online training. This is in addition to any required training by the local registrars in Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax.
Well, what's happening on that committee, if anything, in terms of absentee voting, especially for the elderly?
Sure. Well, we voted, and the Senate has voted, that if you're 65 or older, that you can automatically have an absentee ballot, not having to have a separate excuse in the case of being out of town, that sort of thing. So that's something that's an effort that we've tried before. You know, these things I'm describing won't all pass the House,
right.
And I'm optimistic, but we'll be working on it. We've also passed legislation to make it easier for those who were felons or had been judged mentally incapacitated at one time to register to vote.
And what's happening in terms of redistricting? Before you know it, the state will be back in a redistricting mode, and it should be a lot fairer than it currently is.
Well, there's a lawsuit over the shape of the 30th district, believe it or not, and other districts about how compact they are. Now, we have passed several bills to see that the redistricting criteria make more sense, whether it's through a nonpartisan redistricting commission or just to see that the districts are compact and that we don't shape them based on where an incumbent lives. And I'm okay with that. I want to stay in the General Assembly a long time, but I want the district to be fair for the people, where the people choose whether or not I represent them, rather than for me to choose who my constituents are.
So what's the resistance for against this kind of legislation? I mean, it works for both parties.
Well, in the House, there's more resistance than the Senate. I mean, think of it this way. If you're in charge, you want to maintain the status quo and remain in charge by the largest margin possible. In the Senate, we're much closer with 19 Democrats 21 Democrats. So that's a closer margin, and there's more room to be fair at that point.
Give me an understanding of what's required to get a concealed carry permit in Virginia, and what responsibilities I have if I get one, and what kind of reciprocity I have with other states.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's one of the most controversial issues of this session. And in Virginia, you're required to have a training, go through a particular background check, and you can't have one if you've committed particular crimes. And Attorney General Mark Herring started, for the first Attorney General, enforced the law in that regard, that other states had to meet our standards before we had reciprocity. That's a big deal. And now we have, the governor made a deal with the other side to get some things, some advances in other areas. But in this area, I'm disappointed because we would have reciprocity with 25 states that have less less of the standard than we do, including, for example, in North Dakota, where you can get a permit after you've been convicted of stalking.
Really?
Yeah.
So all the Attorney General was trying to do was to make sure that someone who came into the state of Virginia complied with state law.
Right, to comply with our background checks, what we require, and only have reciprocity with those states.
So what other things came out of this agreement?
Sure. Well, there's two other things that are really good. One is that if you have a permanent protective order, if you're the subject of a permanent protective order, that you can't have a gun. Right now, if you have a protective order against you for battering a spouse or stalking, that sort of thing, you're allowed to have a gun, and that's scary.
So in other words, that individual would be required to turn over a weapon if he or she had one?
Sure, they'd have 1 day, if they had a permanent protective order against them, to turn over the gun. Additionally, something I'm particularly happy with is that the state police will now be at gun shows for voluntary background checks. We require checks for people who are licensed dealers when they sell. And I've been to a gun show, and I asked if I could buy a Glock without a background check. And the private seller, as they're called, said, sure, I can get you one. And I think that's wrong. We're hoping that private sellers will be responsible, take advantage of the state police being there, running that background check that takes less than 5 minutes.
So in other words, if I go to a gun show, there are people there who are federally licensed, and they're required to do a background check, versus someone like you or me who may not hold a federal license, but we want to sell a gun. There's no background check requirement now.
That's right.
This would allow the state police voluntarily, or at least it would allow me, if I want to sell you a weapon, to voluntarily ask the state police to do a background check.
Sure, and when you refer to the gun show about someone who's selling a gun, these people who are not federally licensed, there are people with tables of them with 20 or 30 or 40 guns. So it's not just an individual exchange, but it's quite a significant loophole, and that's what we call the gun show loophole, of course.
Now, what's happening in your district in terms of your local schools, K through 12? Are they faring pretty well?
Generally, yeah. I'm pretty proud of the educational excellence we have in our schools. We do have some struggles because some of our schools have a lot of English language learners and a lot of kids in poverty. And we want to make sure that they get as good a shot as everyone else, and that our schools don't suffer by being miscategorized based on some kids who are newer to the school system.
Now, I understand that there are a multitude of languages from immigrant children who attend those schools nowadays.
Sure, at Wakefield High School in Arlington, there are more than 58 languages in that school alone.
50?
58, more than 58, yeah.
Wow. Are you still hearing much about the standards of learning since there have been some reform efforts?
Yes, it's a big topic for parents and kids. One of the bills I'm proud of that I'm co-sponsoring with Delegate Scott Survell of Mount Vernon that we passed the other day, and I should say Senator Survell now, provides for an alternate testing in 11th grade for reading for kids who are English language learners.
I know there was another question I wanted to ask you that I had forgotten earlier. There was a constitutional amendment that passed some years ago here in the Commonwealth that basically says the only marriage that can be recognized is one between a man and a woman. What happens to that constitutional amendment given the Supreme Court decision?
Well, it's null and void, but nonetheless, I still put in a resolution to repeal it. Now, the resolutions, new resolutions for new constitutional amendments or deletions of existing ones won't be considered until next year because we have a process that it has to pass before a state election and after. So we could have passed them this year, but the practice has been that they wait until the year before the election. So I'm hopeful that next year will bring some clarity to the Constitution with that in that regard.
Now, the governor has, in the second year of his budget, I believe, a pay raise for teachers and state employees. Does that present a burden for local school districts because of the match requirement?
It certainly does. A lot of people don't realize that our local school districts only get a percentage of their funding from the state. Some districts get 80 or 90%, and where we are, you can go as low as 20%. And that's difficult. So if we mandate a 3% raise, that means you're getting 20% of the 3%, and the local district has to put in their 80%. That's a challenge.
Now, there is a higher cost of living in your district in Northern Virginia. How does the local composite index work in that regard, if at all?
Well, it doesn't work well because some of the things taken into effect are the value of homes and the incomes, and it's really kind of a, well, you can do it yourself from local taxes, but the problem is that we're relying on the property tax. So the property taxes, for example, in Fairfax, which isn't a city, can rise just to fund schools, and that's a pretty big controversy we've had with all the influx of children. How's it going to be paid for?
So that's the only tax the state allows you to impose right now at the county level?
Well, there's others. There's a limited cigarette tax, but they don't have the same authority as cities to raise their cigarette tax. There could be a meals tax, but it has to go on a ballot with a referendum, whereas in Alexandria, a city, it can just be imposed, which it was.
Now, in terms of some of the other things the governor suggested in his State of the Commonwealth address is a new paradigm for high school. More emphasis on certification, trade, if you will. How do you think that will work?
Well, it's important. We want kids who come out of school, we want them to be ready to continue, whether they want to go right into the workforce or they want to go to college. And we're trying to adjust, or the governor's trying to adjust, the community college so that people can meet the needs of the companies in Virginia. We have a lot of companies that have moved to Virginia that have good jobs that may not have employees to match. And one of the things we can work on doing that is with registered apprenticeships. I used to work at the Department of Labor and Industry, and we can have companies that have an official apprenticeship with an official curriculum that's recognized by the state. But in the schools, we have career education in Alexandria, Arlington, and Fairfax. And we just want to make sure that meets the jobs, that other areas do it as well, and that we review it.
So that's a way of preparing the workforce of the future in order to retain employers and invite new ones into the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. I mean, while a college education used to be the only ticket to a higher income, it's not the only ticket now. And we have to recognize that not all kids are going to go to college. And that's also a way, an incentive to stay in school and do well in school. I mean, if you want to be an auto mechanic, why not allow the student to learn some of that rather than just after school?
And of course, cybersecurity is a growing field. I think the governor in his remarks said there were like 17,000 jobs out there in cybersecurity, an average starting salary of $80,000 a year.
That's right. I think I should go into cybersecurity based on that, but I don't have the right credentials. But that's what we need to do to diversify from our dependence on military jobs only. Things like cybersecurity are critical to Northern Virginia.
And some of the people who may have those credentials because they've picked that up through experience abroad are returning veterans. And I think they have opportunities now at our community colleges to gain credit based upon the experiences they've had abroad.
Yeah, I was proud to vote for that last year, and we made an advance this year with Senator George Barker's bill to provide that medics in the military could more easily become involved as healthcare workers.
So how do you think the Triple V program, the Virginia Values Veterans Program, is working?
I'm excited about all our veterans programs. That program I haven't evaluated, but we need to do more of that. We have a lot of veterans in the 30th District particularly.
I-66 is in the news again. I think there's an agreement that's been reached on that. Tell us about the controversy that surrounded that and the nature of the agreement as you understand it.
Sure. Well, in Arlington for many years, folks have resisted widening 66. When it was originally done in the 70s, there was a promise that there wouldn't be widening. Houses were taken back then, cut through neighborhoods. It was really a big deal, and that was a promise that the federal government made. Now, folks from further out in Fairfax who drive into D.C. wanted it widened to accommodate more cars. So what we've got is a proposal from the governor that was not calling for a widening right away originally. And in order to seal the deal, there will be widening. And that will be from the Dulles Connector Road going to Ballston eastbound. And that's probably a smart thing because a large percentage of the traffic gets off at Ballston, and there's a bottleneck there. But there will be tolling, which has some controversy. The only people, though, who will be tolled are people who don't carpool. Right now, you can't get on that road during rush hour in rush hour direction without a carpool. So this will provide money, and that money is going to be spent within the corridor. And we constantly need more transportation funding. So that'll allow us to do multimodal improvements, whether it's on Route 50, whether it's on a portion of Route 7 or Lee Highway, or I'm hoping for some bicycle and pedestrian improvements. You know, people don't realize that thousands of bikers commute into D.C. And with the recent snowstorm in Northern Virginia, I've had a hard time getting folks to clear the bike trails, the state-run bike trails, because it's not within our funding plans. So I want to see that improve. I hear from a lot of bicyclists. I mean, we're talking about thousands of bikers. And if they can't commute on their bike, which they want to do, then we're talking about thousands more cars over the Roosevelt Bridge every day.
So these multimodal improvements are critical.
Yeah, and most of them are for buses, that sort of
Right.
thing, and other kinds of transit. But they certainly are critical. I mean, when you have a bus on the road with 30 commuters coming from Fairfax or Chantilly or wherever they all come from, imagine that versus 30 cars makes a big difference.
It certainly does, and we're so pleased that you were able to spend some time with us today, Senator Adam Ebbin.
Thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing my constituents again after the session.
Great. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.